You can have everything going right. You can be successful and openly confessing your faith in God, yet still struggling with pride. Hi everyone, I am LaJoy and I'm back with another episode of Words of Encouragement from Babylon as we travel through the book of Daniel and pick up moments of encouragement from the text. Today we are in Daniel chapter 4 and we will be reading from verses 1 through 9. I will be reading from the New International Version. We're starting with verse 1. Nebuchadnezzar's dream of a tree. Nebuchadnezzar, to the nation and peoples of every language who live in all the earth, may you prosper greatly. It is my pleasure to tell you about the miraculous signs and wonders that the Most High God has performed for me. How great are his signs and how mighty his wonders. His kingdom is an eternal kingdom. His dominion endures from generation to generation. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at home in my palace, content and prosperous. I had a dream that made me afraid. As I was lying in bed, the images and visions that passed through my mind terrified me. So I commanded that all the wise men of Babylon be brought to me to interpret the dream for me. When the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and diviners came, I told them the dream, but they could not interpret it for me. Finally, Daniel came into my presence, and I told him the dream. He is called Belshazzar, after the name of my God, and the spirit of the holy gods is in him. So Nebuchadnezzar opens up this chapter giving God praise and telling the people how great God is, and his kingdom is greater than any kingdom known to man. And we open this chapter with Nebuchadnezzar giving his testimony. So all the hard things that Nebuchadnezzar goes through in this chapter, he has already went through them, and at this point he's giving his testimony. So what did Nebuchadnezzar go through? We'll read later in this chapter that he went through something that was hard, that was humiliating, but it humbled him. And when he got to the other side, he was able to give God praise for what he had been through. What makes Nebuchadnezzar's praise so powerful is that he had went through something hard. He went through something that was embarrassing. He was humiliated. He lost everything that he felt gave him power and security. But when he got to the other side, he was able to look back and realize that it was God who was with him through everything that he had went through. Sometimes when we're going through hard seasons, it's hard for us to see God in the hard season because all we can focus on is what we're losing, what's changing, and how our life is so different. But speaking from experience, the longer we are in that hard season, we'll slowly begin to see God's hand moving in that season. We'll see the signs that God has never left us. We'll realize that, yeah, I'm going through this rough patch, but this is where God showed up to pay that bill for me. This is where God showed up to stop the repossession of my home. This is where God showed up with that positive medical report when I thought that my life was over. Also, the longer you're in the hard season is also the time when you start realizing that, oh, it's some things in me that need to be corrected. For me, it was pride. I didn't like asking people to do stuff for me. I didn't like asking other people to help me in any type of way. And God had to reveal to me, yeah, that's pride. That's pride. If I'm sending someone to help you and you telling them that you don't need any help, you're lying, and that's pride. So sometimes in the hard season, God will strip away those things that not necessarily keeping us from his presence, because the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and those who are crushed in spirit. So, but if we want to go higher, if we want to know God in a different way, there's some things that have to fall off. There's some things that he have to strip away, just like with Nebuchadnezzar. It was his pride. It was his arrogance. It was his narcissistic behavior that God needed to strip away. And the hard season is where that stripping took place. It's in the hard season that God reveals a new aspect of who he is. It's in the hard season where God restores those broken places within us. So the hard season, though it's hard, God is still present, and he is still working, and he is still moving for your benefit. The hard thing that Nebuchadnezzar went through taught him something that any other experience could have never taught him. And it taught him that his power is limited, but God's power is eternal. It also taught him that his kingdom could be taken, even though Daniel had already told him that in his last dream, his kingdom can be taken. And even though it was taken from him temporarily, God restored him. So it re-emphasized the fact that it is God who lifts up one man and tears one down. But God's kingdom can never be destroyed and never torn down. So that is the lesson that Nebuchadnezzar had to learn. My one encouragement is that who God is doesn't change just because your circumstances have changed. God does not stop being God because our lives no longer look the way we want them to look. Your plans can change. Your circumstances can change. Your position on your job can change. Your finances can change. But who God is and the authority that he has in your life will never change. You may be in the middle of a season right now that you do not understand. But that's the thing, you're in the middle of it. You're not at the end. God still has the final word. And one day you may look back and say, just like Nebuchadnezzar, look what the Most High God has done for me. No matter what situation you're going through, no hard season is beyond God's reach. And no person who humbles their heart before God is beyond his mercy. Another point I want to make from this passage of scripture, I want to focus on verse 4 where Nebuchadnezzar says, "And I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at home in my palace, content and prosperous." When things are going good, we tend to think that everything will always be great. And maybe we don't focus on God as much as we do when we're struggling or when things are not going well. Don't get so caught up in the things that God has blessed you with that you become so obsessed with those things and you become disconnected from God. Don't allow those things to make you lose your relationship with God. Nebuchadnezzar was talking about how he was content in his palace and he was prosperous. But he was focused on his things, not realizing who blessed him to have those things, who allowed those things to happen in his life. And I know Nebuchadnezzar was not a worshiper of the Most High God, but Daniel told him that it was God who allowed him to have these things. Remember back in Daniel chapter 2, when Daniel interpreted his last dream with the statue and the head of gold? Let's go back to Daniel chapter 2, verse 37 and 38. It says, "Your Majesty, you are the King of Kings. The God of heaven has given you dominion and power and might and glory. In your hands he has placed all mankind and the beasts of the field and the birds of the sky. Wherever they live, he has made you ruler over them all. You are that head of gold." So Daniel had already told him that your position, your power, your prosperity, it came from God. Daniel made it clear that Nebuchadnezzar's authority was not something that he created on his own. And it also makes me think back to Jeremiah, when Jeremiah called Nebuchadnezzar's God's servant. But by the time we get to chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar has forgotten all about God, and he's sitting prosperous and content in his palace, thinking that all of this was his doing, his power. So make sure that while you're praying for everything to change, when everything starts to change and everything is going well again, don't forget the one you were praying to. Don't forget how he blessed you and restored you during your hard season. Don't start trying to take credit for something that God did in your life. Make sure to give God credit. Okay, the last point I want to point out in this passage of scripture is that Nebuchadnezzar had already seen the miraculous ways that God could move. He saw how Daniel was able to tell him his dream and interpret the dream without him giving him any information, thus showing that God spoke to Daniel. He saw God show up for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace, and how after he threw them in, they came out unharmed and not even smelling like smoke. So he knows how powerful God is. But yet, here he has another dream that has disturbed him. And what does he do? He goes to the magicians, the astrologers, the diviners, to try to get them to interpret the dream, and they could not. Finally, he goes to Daniel for an interpretation, who he knows that the holy God speaks to. And Daniel is able to interpret the dream. This makes me think about how you can see God move. You can experience God moving and still not submit to him. Still not put all of your trust in him. Because what did Nebuchadnezzar do? After all of the signs and miracles he witnessed, he still resorted back to his practices. He even, when he referred to Daniel, he called him Belteshazzar, who was named after his gods. Didn't even call him Daniel, his real name, his God-given name. How many times are we going to resort to our way of doing things and failing before we realize that we need to go to God first? We need to do it God's way first, because he could have saved time by messing with the same people who couldn't interpret the dream from chapter 2, couldn't interpret the dream from chapter 4. And Daniel was the one who was able to give him the answers, because Daniel was sent by God. I want to wrap up by saying that man looks at the outside appearance, but God looks at the heart. You can be working in ministry. God can be using you, but does he have your heart? You can be working in ministry and God is still working on you. Thank God for his grace that he gives us before the correction comes. Thank God that he gives us a warning to get it right before he brings correction, like he did Nebuchadnezzar. Sometimes God will allow us to go through hard seasons to break off those things that need to be shaken up in our lives, like pride, like arrogance, like narcissistic behavior. The hard season is where those things will get shaken, and where our relationship with God will become renewed. It's in the hard seasons that we humble ourselves before God so that he can elevate us to a higher place in him. Proverbs 16 verse 18 says, "Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall." Daniel chapter 4 shows us what that looks like. Nebuchadnezzar stood at the height of his power, but then he forgot where that power came from. He fell in a mighty way, and we're going to see that as we continue through this chapter. But God's mercy met him, and when he humbled himself before God, God restored him. And God can do the same thing for us. No matter what we're going through, whether the hard season that we're going through is of our own making, is because we were prideful, or whatever the situation may be, God's mercy and his grace is sufficient for us during the season, and his restoration will take place. Restoration is coming. Whether we are restored in this life or the next, restoration is coming. I believe that. I believe that everything that I'm going through is not for nothing. I believe that there is purpose in my pain. And if nothing else, I am learning God in a new way in this season. I am studying his word in a new way in this season. So I thank God for that. If you enjoyed this video, please watch the next video in the series from Words of Encouragement from Babylon. Be blessed.